right, so we're still here at the Manila Dialogue in the South China Sea over at the Great Grand Hyatt Hotel here in BGC. And we have with us Georgi Engelbrecht with the Crisis Group. Georgie, welcome to Sitrep.
Hi, Magdang Hapon. Pleasure to talk to you.
So perhaps we can start off the meeting by asking what do you do over at the Crisis Group and what's with the interest that Crisis Group is having in the Philippines? What did you guys do here?
Well, we're basically a global international organization that focuses on conflict prevention. So we usually have field analysts in many conflict areas. I joined ICG in early 2020, and our focus here is to look at the Bangsamoro peace process, the CPP-NPA insurgency in the Philippines, as well as the subject of today, the South China Sea maritime disputes, which has, of course, more of a regional character.
So why do you think, what's the importance of having such a conference here in Manila right now, discussing the South China Sea and bringing all these people here to discuss the issue?
Well, first of all, it's a great networking and togetherness opportunity, like people interacting even outside of the formal program, but also having really deep and enriching discussions about rule of law, UNCLOS, but also the state of the conflict that we see. So that is clearly very beneficial. But also, Philippines is at the front lines right now, perhaps together with Vietnam. And I think to have these events in capitals directly is also raising awareness among the populace, among stakeholders, among academics and experts. And I think the stuff you guys do is also great to popularize these issues and these questions to make sure people can tune in and learn more about different perceptions and different ideas.
Why do you think the Philippines is suddenly the center of attention right now? Why have this conference right now in Manila? Why is there suddenly such an interest in Philippine foreign policy?
Well, I actually think the interest has always been there. If you go back to the 90s, Mischief Reef, Philippines, Scarborough Shoal, 2012, Philippines, Second Thomas Shoal last year, and what happened on June 17, also Philippines. I think among the claimants, it's really Vietnam and Philippines that are the most affected, given the number of incidents and the overall nature of the dispute. And of course, we have a very vibrant media landscape in the Philippines, a lot of good experts and analysts. And ultimately, the Philippines is in a very important position. It's an US ally, it has features that are straight at the heart of the Spratlys, so it will bear the brunt of potential escalation. And I think it doesn't come as a surprise that we have this event today.
And how do you think the Philippines is doing in reacting to a lot of these pressing challenges and reacting to the changing waters in the South China Sea, literally and and metaphorically? How do you rate the current foreign policy of President Marcos and the administration, for example?
Well, I think foreign policy, but also to respond to this complex set of disputes, is always work in progress. And I think the Philippines comes from a very tricky baseline to begin with. I mean, we all know the country focused for decades on internal security. So even 2012, when I spoke to some officers assigned in Mindanao, everybody knew the West Philippine Sea and the maritime domain is the key theater. But at the end of the day, the country was still stuck in local violence, in insurgency. And I think now it's really trying to make this transition. And I do believe that ultimately we also have seen an evolution from what has been happening in the 90s over Aquino via Duterte and until now. I think it's not easy to find the best recipe to respond to the disputes. But I think ultimately Manila is trying a bunch of strategies, is sometimes cautious for a good reason, and is what I noticed also here during the conference, right, is emphasizing its moral high ground and its reference to international law. And I think it's remarkable because at the time when international law is being challenged across the world, we have here someone that argues really for that legal regime. And at the same time, the country realized it really needs to boost its defense and leverage its partnerships and its alliance with the United States. How exactly it will transition, given the urgency of the issues, is the big questions. How many ships will come, when, what is the overall strategy, what happens after transparency? The devil is in the details, and I think here Manila needs to do some more. But I think overall, finally we have the discussions and reflections that are very much needed at this point in time.
You mentioned your time covering the insurgencies here in the Philippines, down in Bangsamoro with the CPP-NPA across the country. How do you think the situation is in terms of the insurgency now compared to when you were based here in the early 2010s? Have you seen improvements? And what are the challenges for the Philippines moving from a insurgency-focused national security to a more external security focus?
Well, I always tell people that in the 2010s, we had two major peace agreements in the world, Philippines and Colombia. The Colombian process is a little bit challenged at the moment, I would say. The Philippine Bangsamoro peace process is not perfect, but I think it still goes into the right direction. And the government knows that if it succeeds, it has really something to show for to the international community. The danger here lies is that sometimes perhaps it pays less attention to details, because in order to successfully conclude a peace process, and by the way, you cannot just conclude it, it's like everyday practice, maybe more small scale issues and unresolved questions need to be fixed in Mindanao. But I think we have regional autonomy. We have a commitment by the national government to correct the injustices that happened in the decades before. So, all in all, I think we're on track, but we need to do more on some particular issues: land conflicts, gun ownership, local violence, and so forth. And with respect to the CPP and PA, I mean, here we have the two tracks: potentially peace talks with a big question mark, but also improving basic services in the countryside. I would say we're on track, but it's not perfect, and ideally, it really needs to be improved. But the key here is peace would benefit national security. That's, from a rational perspective, one of the key drivers of this shift. Because if we have instability in Mindanao or in other parts of the Philippine army in particular will continue to be tied to that, area. And I think for now we see that the real challenge is on the maritime domain and on defense of its borders. So to make this shift is really the key necessity right now. The question is, what's the deadline? I mean, when ideally should this happen? Perhaps people would say it should have started yesterday, but I think it's of course a work in progress, and hopefully the leadership is aware of that impetus, especially given the fact that we have almost monthly incidents now in the South China Sea.
You're the senior analyst of Crisis Group based here in Manila. How do you guys perceive what's going on in the South China Sea? What are the dangers, and what naturally it's a big question in Philippine social media? What's the chances that it will go hot? So perhaps you can maybe dispel a few of the myths or maybe confirm them.
All right. So first of all, I would invite everyone, if you're interested in the history of the dispute, and also particularly on Philippines and Vietnam and different understandings of international law by US and China, check out our website. We have a bunch of cool reports there, so you can just read it. I would say the risk is increasing, of course, year by year, but I also think that neither the US nor China nor the Philippines nor Vietnam has an interest in conflict. So here we are actually towards the possibility of accidents and something where an unfortunate maneuver can cause an escalation drive. And I think on June 17, we really came close to it when we had that incident around Second Thomas Shoal. But right now, I just came back from Palawan doing field work. We've also seen that both Philippines and China stepped a little bit back, and the US is, of course, busy with its elections. So for now, I think the situation is manageable. But given the fact that we don't have any resolution of the conflict inside, it's only management. That's also what we've seen here during the conference. The risk will always remain. And the question is, can we just assume that nothing will go wrong? This is the biggest danger. So I think we need to build more trust and confidence. Like Admiral Gavan mentioned early this morning, the Philippines tries to build up relationships again with its neighbors. Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia would be a good step forward, as well as having the BCM with China. But BCM will not resolve the problem, it can only manage it. So I think what we need is really the men and women of the Coast Guard, of the Navy, have to be, of course, very watchful to see what really happens, because it does seem that the biggest puzzle for the Philippines is to respond properly to the gray zone. If you make a misstep, it can easily backfire. And I think for China, it is important not to overstep as well. So the key question is what will happen if someone dies? Whether a Chinese sailor, Philippine sailor, a
Yes.
Vietnamese one, what will happen? And of course, emotions will run high, media frenzy, but then what will be the actions? And I think we shouldn't be in that position. But at the same time, every country wants to assert its maritime rights.
Yes.
And it is undeniable. But I think it can still happen below the threshold of escalation.
And you, for our last question, you mentioned the U.S. election, so I can't let you go without getting your initial reactions, especially with regards to U.S.-Philippine relations. How do you foresee it going into an era of Trump and Republican control of the United States? Do you expect that the commitments to the alliance will still be there? And how do you see the relationship between President Trump and President Marcos moving forward?
Well, the known is that it seems to be that there's a bipartisan consensus to support the Philippines. It is also true that the alliance obviously cannot simply be abrogated, but it's also true that Donald Trump has projected a lot of uncertainty and unpredictability to the world as a whole, not only the Philippines. I think we just published a report a couple of weeks ago on the repercussions of the elections on US China policy. So we spelled out some options there as well. I think for now it's still speculative
Yes.
because we don't know who will be President Trump's advisors. We don't really know who will be driving certain key developments. We've heard from Professor Kraska that we'll expect more fun ups, which could be not much of a difference to what we have right now, but more transactionalism, so called, right? So it will mean with the Philippines to pay more for what exactly? It doesn't host US troops unlike Korea or Japan, but we do have EDCA. So the question is EDCA important enough for the US to continue supporting, or will there be a change of parameters? That is a bit early to say. And I think from what I understand, EDCA has been also fairly at its infancy, right? It's just about some
Yes.
basics across the sites. So perhaps the Philippines are not actually on the radar of President Trump as something that will soak up a lot of money. But then again, you never know.
Right.
And I think the initiatives of the Philippines to strengthen its self reliance defense posture are also very, very important. And here the question is what more can be done, also taking into consideration the Philippine system? We know that lawmakers have been aware of national security for decades, for years. But what are the actions? And secondly, the Philippines need to spend money for a lot of other things: education, disaster relief, the peace process. So we need good budget planning, a good national vision, and a strategy. If that is in place, I hope Manila would not need to worry.
Thank you so much, Georgi Engelbrecht from Crisis Group. Thank you so much for speaking to Sitrep PH.
Cheers, salamat.
Salamat.